Okay, great. So thanks everyone for having me here. Thanks Ivan and the organizers for inviting me. This is something that I'm very interested in, especially very recently. So I'm glad that this workshop is happening. I think it's a very timely time to have it. I think there's a lot of progress and powerful things you can do with these tools, but I think it's a great time right now because there's a lot of things that you can't do with them yet. So if we think about these questions now, we can get to them and figure out how to use these tools before we're all behind and it's too late in some sense. Maybe it'll never happen, but who knows? So I'm going to talk about this technique called inference time scaling. It's something that I think is can be exceptionally useful because all the techniques I'm going to talk about are things that you could use yourself with publicly available models. You can maybe even vibe code the scaffolding that you would need to make these sort of inference time scaling techniques. So these are all very sort of achievable things to do on your laptop, and that can unlock like sort of significant gains for the problem-solving ability of AI tools. So I always want to mention this is a joint work with a ton of people, mostly on my team, but also all around academia. My team is the Omega team. We're just down on 14th Street, doing research. Okay, and I have to say that a lot of these slides Vincent originally made, so thanks to Vincent for many of these slides. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start by just discussing sort of like a series of events, things that have happened the last year, news blurbs. This is sort of what we've accomplished in the last year. And I mean Google Research, but I mean sort of generally the community. And then I'm going to talk about sort of the crucial inference time scaling techniques that were used to achieve these improvements. And then I'll talk about a couple very briefly, like sort of future directions and how we can go beyond the current techniques and sort of what people are really looking forward to in 2026. And so I'll start, and also please feel free to interrupt me with questions at any point. So I start with talking about this IMO Grand Challenge. So many of you have probably heard about this Grand Challenge or the IMO. The IMO is obviously a very famous mathematical competition for high schoolers. It's probably the most prestigious one. It's very challenging. And it was seen as sort of this grand challenge. Can we get an AI model to get a gold medal? It's like considered in the top tier of human performance on the IMO. And this was sort of posed as a grand challenge. It may or may not have been resolved. The original posing was for a lean-based proof that hasn't been done yet, but it was done with natural language last year. And so why was this such a big challenge? Why did people think this would be an important milestone? And the reason is that there's a lot of math benchmarks, like the AIME, there's another benchmark called math. And these are sort of maybe like high school level or like they have the structure that the class of problems that are given to you come from a very small class of potential problem types. They all have a similar structure potentially. The answer to these problems will be a numeric, not like a number. Like the answer is like 5 or 30, or what is the value of x such that something happens. So it's a simple numeric answer, either you're right or you're wrong. And because of the limited pattern type of problems that they encounter, you can imagine models, and they actually do, solving these problems just by pattern matching. Oh, I saw how to integrate by parts in this one problem, so I'll just do a similar thing here. It's not clear that the model is actually learning or like doing some novel reasoning to solve these AIME problems. On the other hand, the IMO has sort of a much more unlimited class of problems that could potentially be come up with. Like the people who come up with these problems, they try very hard to make sure that they're not reformulations of earlier problems that appeared in the past. So it's a very rigorous process. And very importantly, for the IMO, having the right number at the end isn't the correct answer. The answer is the reasoning that got there. You need to have a complete proof that justifies your answer. So it's the reasoning which is the correct answer, not necessarily the numeric answer at the end. So it's not just a more difficult problem, it's a completely different challenge entirely for these models, which is why it was seen, integration by parts is one thing, but if you can solve IMO problems, then maybe you're really getting at something like human creativity. And so the core problem that I'm going to discuss today is that for AI, if you try to go and take an IMO problem from last year or the past and put it into like your favorite, online model, GPT, Gemini, whatever, and you run it one time, most of the time it's unlikely to solve a very complex multi-part IMO problem on one run. So how can we go beyond this sort of single shot issue of LLMs? Like run it once, it doesn't give you the right answer. So I want to talk about a couple things that happened. Maybe people know about many of these. So the first thing is that last year, Gemini 2.5 achieved gold medal. GPT had a similar result on the IMO. It scored. We got correctly 5 out of 6 problems. So this put us, amongst the top human contestants. And one of the key things that happened that people were less excited about the gold and more excited about this sort of transition here, which was that in 2024 we had a silver medal, which is say slightly worse performance, but it was done using a highly specialized system.
Does this work? Good. Okay. It was done using like a highly specialized system, which was specialized. They had a certain system for geometry called alpha geometry. It was all lean based. But last year, it was done purely in natural language. So this was seen as a big step in progress. So, and it did this within the official time limit, 4.5 hour time limit the contestants also got. Very similar result for the ICPC. It's a programming contest. It's very similar in difficulty to the IMO. We also got a gold medal this year using a very similar system. Interestingly, there's this one problem C, where the model was able to solve the problem, but no human team was able to solve the problem. We can see the converse is also true for like problem G, for example. So, but that means that like it's able to solve some things that no human university team was able to solve. So it's not just mimicking humans and what humans are doing and at a certain level. It's actually discovering sort of novel reasoning pathways. Yes. Oh, sorry. This is the time to solve it in seconds, and sorry, in minutes. So, on top where? I see. It's probably best of 6. It probably reran the system, so it's probably 6 times. It may have been run in parallel. So, but that means that like probably the attempt that solved it took that amount of time, but it was run multiple times. The whole system. That's probably a human. Well, so the thing about this programming contest is it's verifiable. Like the code runs, it does the thing or it doesn't. IMO needs to be human graded, but ICPC has the advantage that it's human. It's like so you don't need a human to go and look at the. And then one thing that is more recent that I've been very interested in is sort of the converse problem, like the NP to the P, which is getting models to solve problems is all great, but can we get it to like verify solutions? Can we get it to look at your complicated mathematical proofs and figure out, are they valid? Are there issues with them? And this is an equally difficult problem in many ways. And so we partnered with Stock, which is a prestigious theoretical computer science conference, and we offer this as a tool to provide deadline feedback to authors. So authors, a week before the deadline, they could submit their paper. The AI would run a bunch of computations and give them back sort of a structured summary of potential issues and holes in the mathematical proofs. Ideally, the hope is that none of them had holes, but of course, in reality, we know that authors make mistakes, and then often these can be fixed. And so this was sort of widely folks seem to like this quite a bit. And interestingly, for a non-trivial fraction, about 12% of the papers that were run on, it actually found what we asked was a theoretical gap that took more than an hour to fix. So some fraction of papers had a significant theoretical gap, and it took some, like for example, Jason Lee, who said we could quote him, said it found a technical error that had eluded him. He knew how to fix it, but it took him multiple hours to fix it. So these are the kinds of things that like it's not yet rediscovering entire proofs, but it's finding serious technical gaps that a human reviewer probably would not have been able to find. And recently we did a similar thing for ICML, which is a machine learning conference. So we asked more broader questions like, are there gaps in the experiments? Is there a confounder in this experiment that could actually yield the results to be trivial? Or should they have run some other experiment compared to some other baseline, in addition to the theoretical questions and so on? And we found even more theoretical gaps than before. Maybe it's because ICML, there's maybe less attention to theory potentially, but nearly a third of authors also ended up running completely new experiments. So I think going forward, using AI as a tool for peer review is also, and for maybe sub-reviewing, not replacing peer review, is going to be exceptionally useful, especially now that we have tens of thousands of submissions to these AI conferences. It's very difficult to keep up. So this is what I wanted to say about what's happened. And so this is sort of 2025, some of the major major goals that were achieved. And I want to talk about sort of one of the main techniques which enable these goals, because for many of the things that I just described, if you went into your browser and tried to solve the similar problem with whatever was available to you, even if you have like the Ultra subscription, it may not solve these problems. And I can tell you that it's not because it's not a different model; it's a different technique on top of the model, and this is this inverse time scaling that allows you to do this kind of thing. So I want to talk about this single shot limitation. So this is something I mentioned earlier. If you just give a very complex problem to a model, one model call, and ask it to try to solve it, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. It could make a subtle bug, and then once it's made that bug, it never recovers from that bug. It could miss a crucial edge case, for example. The second issue is that oftentimes the problem you're going to give it is so complex, or maybe you review this 200-page stock paper. There's so much in there that it's just simply the amount of reasoning required exceeds what's so-called the reasoning budget of these models. These models produce thinking tokens when they're trying to solve these problems, and it's expensive because the runtime scales quadratically the number of thinking tokens. So there's a budget, and so a single model maybe is allowed 64,000 thinking tokens, but solving the problem that you want to solve may require well more than that. So a single model call just simply won't resolve the problem that you're trying to solve. And so the solution to this kind of thing is to not rely on one simple model call, but to develop a process that systematically, a scaffolding that systematically finds and validates solutions, potential solutions, from a sea of possible, plausible solutions that are many are incorrect, finding the correct solution and narrowing down that process, almost like a human researcher does through the process of trying to work on a problem. And this technique I'll broadly define, I'll give my own definition, and I'll call it inference time scaling. It's the framework and scaffolding on top of models that already exist that utilize multiple structured model calls, maybe with different prompts or different goals, and extended thinking to solve harder problems than would be available with a single model call. And I'll mention, like, I like to think about this, as a TCS researcher, as an optimization problem. No matter who you are, you have some budget. Let's say I only have the budget to make n model calls. What is the best way to allocate and use this compute budget that I have to maximize the probability that I solve the problem that I want to solve? And so there's some optimization problem, and we'll see different ways to potentially allocate these model calls.
Is the goal to do this question independent? Like just some general thing, or do you scaffold and create a framework based on the question?
Well, it could be, the framework could be question dependent. The things that I'm going to talk about first are sort of just independent of the question. And then, for example, the scaffolding that we use to do paper reviewing is maybe different than we would use to solving problems. Like paper reviewing, there's a paper that came out recently called Scholar Peer 2 days ago. And they have one model that is like the literature review model. It's going out, it's like trying to situate this paper in the general context. Like, is it an important paper? And these kinds of things. So I think the scaffolding definitely can depend on the question, but you can imagine problem independent things as well. And generality is always great if possible. So let me give you just like a very simple example of this that actually is surprisingly powerful. And it's so simple that it's very easy you can try it yourself, and it's so powerful that it'll hopefully help you solve many problems that you may not have been able to otherwise. And this is just like a generation and combination idea. So here's the first thing. I have my problem, and I'm going to ask the model to solve it multiple times. I'm going to have n samples, n model generations for the same problem. Generation 1, generation 2, generation 3. These are all independent calls to the model. Now, I'm going to get a diverse pool of samples, and you'll actually see for mathematical problems, oftentimes you do get quite a diversity in the techniques and approaches that models use to solve these problems. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply combine them. I'm going to have another model call. I'm going to give them the last model, same prompt, solve this problem that I want you to solve. But here are, let's say, 3 solutions that were given in the past. They may be flawed, they may not be flawed. Think of them as potential hints that may be helpful for you to follow your solution. Don't think of them as necessarily correct. Here are some prior attempts. And it can use these prior attempts, or it can ignore them and try to come up with a solution. So this simple framework is actually what we're going can give already big gains over just calling the model multiple times independently or calling it once. And so the core research question is this 2-stage process more effective than simply generating once, or even say generating multiple times and seeing what the best answer is among like best of n? And the second question is, how robust is this combination stage? Suppose I have 100 generations, one of them is correct, 99 are incorrect. Is the combination stage at the end going to be correct, or is it going to get lost in the noise from the first stage? So it turns out that the answer to both of these things is sort of what you would hope it would be. It's robust to noise and it's more effective. So let's look at both of those questions. The first one is, how effective is this first stage, this generation stage? And so one way of looking at this is we looked at the first 15 questions of this AIME data set, and then we ran the model 100 times on each of the question. And what the bar plot here is the pass at one success rate. So that means what fraction of the 100 model calls successfully solved the problem. So you can see for like problem 0, every single one solved it. So basically it's like all of them are correct. For some 14, none of them were correct. That problem, you're not going to get any luck on that one. But for some of them, you'll see like 1, 8, and 10, and 11, a small but non-zero fraction of the models were able to solve the problem. So 10% of the time, you successfully solved the problem. So that's good. But in particular, that means that calling the model multiple times is better than calling the model once. That's actually maybe obvious, but in some sense, if you think about it, it's not necessarily obvious that calling the model multiple times will allow you to solve a problem that you wouldn't with just one model call. This is a restriction on the model context window or generation length. So like full allows more thinking than the short. That's a limit on the thinking tokens of the model. Yes, I mean, yeah. It seemed I'm not that is counterintuitive. I'm not sure why. I may be mixing something up here. I did not run this experiment, but I was so. It is a difference in the model. I'm not sure why it's doing worse for full context length, but in any event, I'll get back to you on that if I want to find the answer. It's possibly. It's like, hey, you know, maybe you let it go wild. It thinks too much and then it confuses itself. You know, it's possible. Okay, so the second question: how good is it at combining answers amidst a pool of potentially incorrect answers? So here's how we studied this. We look at those. There's three problems here: 1, 8, and 10. These are all hard problems, or 1, 8, and 11, where the model had some chance of solving them. So we looked at those specific 3 problems: 1, 8, and 11. These are the 3 charts. And what we did was we took the model and we constructed one correct proof, and then we found we also constructed n incorrect proofs, where n is like between 1 and 8. So we took basically exactly one correct answer and n randomly sampled incorrect answers, and we put them all together, and then we fed them into the combination model, and then we asked the combination model to solve the problem. And then we asked, how does the performance of the combination model deteriorate as the number of incorrect answers compared to correct answers increases? And so you can see naturally it does go down. When you have 0 wrong answers, it always got question 1 right. Somehow, you know, it didn't always even get question 8 right, even when it was fed the right answer only. So that's kind of surprising. And you can see that the quality goes down, but surprisingly, like, see, even for 8 wrong answers here, and the red line here is the baseline. That's the probability that if you ran the model once, it would be correct. So you can see that these models are quite robust. Even if it has 8 wrong answers, 1 right answer, it's still doing nearly double for this problem with the baseline of just running the model multiple times. So this is saying that not only does running the model multiple times make you more likely to find a correct solution, but you can actually find that correct solution from all the noise by combination. Good. Well, we didn't do it past 8. I mean, so there is some limit, right? Because all of these things are going into the context of the combination model. So at some point, you just can't, like, there's a context limit. After that, then certainly, yeah. But it'll continue. I mean, you can imagine it'll continue to go down. It's well studied that the performance of models on all sorts of tasks goes down as you start making the problem longer in context length, like needle in the haystack type problems and these sorts of things. No, it was the same. It was the same, like the same generic prompt. Here are some prior solutions. Try to. If it was, then probably there's no way you would have less than 100% here. Like it would have just taken the answer from the prior stage. Yeah. Okay. So I think there's even some nice sort of like intuition for why for an even stronger property than the prior 2 properties that I discussed. And that's that oftentimes you'll find that the combination model is able to solve the problem correctly when all of the first generations were actually incorrect. And so you could ask, how could that be? How could the combination model, you know, it's not, none of the prior generations were correct. How could it, you know, be using them? And the thing is, like, it goes back to this idea of these complicated questions. Like if you look at these, you know, Putnam problems, for example. Putnam is a famous mathematical competition for college students. The solutions to these problems often require more, especially the 5 and 6 problems, often require more than just one insight. You need one insight, but then you need another insight after that. There's multiple key ideas that you need to solve the problem. And because of this complexity, it's unlikely that maybe one model call was able to come up with all of those at the same time. So if you think about this like sort of in an idealized statistical setting, imagine I needed 3 ideas to solve my problem. And let's assume that all 3 of these ideas were like sort of independent ideas. Then you could say maybe the probability that a model finds each of these ideas is independently 10%. So in order to solve it by having n model calls, I would need 1,000 model calls in order to expect that a single model call simultaneously comes up with all 3 of these ideas that it needed to solve the problem. On the other hand, if I'm allowed to combine solutions, I just need each of these ideas to occur at least once in one of the generations. So you can, do the math, and it turns out that roughly 17 point something, maybe 18, is the expected number of model calls you need for 3 independent ideas with probably 1/10 each to appear in one of the model calls. So this significantly speeds up, like it makes it more compute efficient. You just need to come up with the different ideas independently, and then the synthesizer will synthesize them. Okay, so what time does it start? Like is it 35? Okay, great. Okay, so I want to talk about So just a summary of this 2-stage process actually works very well. This very simple thing that I've described. It's the combination is robust to noise. We saw that. And this sort of implies a general principle is that any complicated inference time scaling procedure should be built up on some, building block of like generating diverse ideas to inject diversity and then combining to synthesize potentially different ideas. And so almost everything we'll see is based on some variant of this. And so there's a ton of work in the research community studying these 2 ideas. And in what follows, I'm going to talk about 2 sort of complementary approaches to utilizing this in a general system for inference time scaling. So in the second, I'll talk about these 2 approaches. So the first one comes from this paper of Huang and Yang. So last year, when OpenAI and Google had these announcements of solving the IMO with gold medal, it's a specialized system, it's not public. So these folks asked, like, can we reproduce this IMO gold medal using our own inference time scaling on top of a public model, Gemini 2.5? And they actually were able to reproduce the gold medal just using the following pipeline that I'm going to talk about, which is just purely scaffolding, running the model multiple times in a structured way with prompts. And it follows this idea of sort of like a human refine and then iterate. Like I find errors and then I iterate on the errors. I find errors and then I keep looping until I can finally converge on a correct answer. So here's how it works. I first take my problem, I feed it to the model, and I ask the solver model, try to solve the problem. And then the solver model is going to produce some feasible solution proof to the problem. Maybe it's wrong. And then I'm going to feed it to a verifier model. The verifier model has a prompt, and these prompts are public. You can go look at the paper. You could try it yourself. The prompt is the verifier model is asked to be a meticulous grader and to produce a bug report containing all the potential flaws in the solution. So it'll classify the errors that either this is a critical error, it completely invalidates the proof, or this is maybe not an error, but like it's a justification gap. There needs to be some more justification to make this a rigorous proof. So it takes this bug report, feeds it back to the verifier model. Now back to the solver model. Now the solver again says, okay, let me try to fix these bug reports. So it gets this old solution, it gets the bug report, and now it tries to iterate and improve its solution to resolve the issues that were discussed in the verifier bug report. And then you keep looping like this. It goes back to the verifier finds more bugs. So what's sort of going on? Well, the verifier is iteratively finding issues, and the hope is that you're making progress, right? The hope is that you're not going in circles, and eventually you're making some progress and resolving all the issues, and at some point there's no more issues left. And you repeat until either you pass the verifier 5 times. If you pass it 5 times in a row, you think, okay, this is probably correct. If you fail 10 times, maybe you give up. And that's the whole pipeline. This is sort of the diagram from the paper. It just sort of starts with the verifier, and then you enter this loop of verification and self-improvement, having these bug reports until you conclude. And one of the things that this really addresses is that every time you have a new bug report verifier solver loop, what you're sort of doing is injecting a new budget of thinking into this problem. So we mentioned with its limitation 2 of single-shot models, these models have a limit to how much they can think. Just because of computational resources. But every time you call it on a fresh set of bug reports, it's allowed to it's a fresh new model. It could think from scratch about this new bug report. So it's every time you run, you're injecting more compute budget for thinking. And this is sort of addressing the second limitation. So let me talk about another approach to doing this kind of inference time scaling. And this is like a very complementary approach using a different sort of idea. Instead of sort of a sequential refine and verify. Yeah. Well, it's the same model, just as a different prompt. It's the same. It's the same, like, like the model. Yeah, we're just giving them names. Like to be clear, these models. This is just ChatGPT 5.2 or Gemini. This is not a specialized proprietary model. This is just any model. We're giving it a name because we give it a prompt that says you have a certain job. Your job is to do this. And like, because this division of tasks seems to be very important. If you try to get one model to do everything, to like solve the problem, verify it, check it, like, it's too much thinking. It's too big of a task. But if you split the task into these different stages where you can iteratively refine and inject, new thinking budget, it's much more powerful than just doing it once. But really, under the hood, it's just one model. Yep.
Maybe one thing is, what context does each of these roles get? And so verifier, does it see this? Is it that the same prompt is saying like, well, now verify your own proof, or is it like a different one says like, well, this is the proof, but what got it, but then it verify it now?
It gives, so you get sort of like a trailing memory. So like the verifier is given as input the proof and the original problem, and then the proof, and it verifies that. It produces the bug report. Then the bug report, and if I remember the last proof that the solver proved, it gives into the solver and the original problem, but not the proof potentially that came before that. Only the most recent one, because again, otherwise you'd sort of have a blow up in the context, and this is sort of defeating the point. But you can imagine like what could be the issue with this is that maybe it starts to go in circles. Like it has like some short-term memory. It turns out that often it doesn't. But like you can imagine what the issue with this would be. So the second method maybe will not have that same downside to the same extent.
The AI model compete. So if you say Gemini said this, and you see the next thing.
I mean, there's some psychology stuff that maybe these models are better depending on if you're nice to them or if you're to get them to compete. I don't think that we've seen any there's been no study as far as I know that actually shows a notable like if you interact with different models differently. I mean, obviously different models have different capabilities and are good at different benchmarks, but in terms of interplaying, I haven't seen. It could be good for diversity. We have seen that diversity is very important for generating solutions to difficult problems. So maybe having different diversity of models. I haven't studied that, but it's definitely an interesting thing. So this other approach comes from this paper called recursive self-aggregation. So we'll call it RSA. Obviously, RSA means multiple things, but so what is the idea here? This is going to be like an evolutionary approach to using multiple model calls to start with a problem and come up with a final solution. So instead of taking one solution and iteratively refining it over and over again until perfection, you have a whole population of solutions that are being refined in generations over time and mingling with each other, kind of like a scientific community where you have many researchers, they talk to each other in randomized groups, and then they circulate ideas, but not all together at once. So how does the algorithm work? Well, basically what we're going to do is maintain a population, PT, and PT is the population at time t, and it consists of n distinct solutions at that time step, coming from n distinct generations. So we initialize the population by asking the model to solve the problem n times independently. So how do we generate the next solution, the next population? Well, we need to fill n slots. So for each slot, we sample k random solutions from the prior step, and then we try to do this combination thing. We take those k prior solutions, we say, here, solve the problem again, but here are some k prior attempts at solving the problem. And then each person in item in the population samples a random k from the prior, and then that fills out your next step. And you keep doing that for capital T time steps. And at the end, you have this PT, which either you can look at each one individually or try to combine them into a single one to get your solution.
So you say that you're going to produce n different solutions, but why you give it the same prompt? Why would the LLM produce different solutions?
Because the LLMs are highly like non-deterministic. They have like every word is sampled from a probability distribution. Yeah, like even running the model one time on this. Yeah, you will see that the models run like we try to enforce backtracking. These thinking models, they've been taught to try to do some backtracking if they get stuck. But you will see that sometimes a model will get on a path, and then once they're on that path, they're going to veer off. So there's a lot of non-determinism. which is why the diversity of solutions is very important. Go ahead.
From is it important to randomize approach when you do this evaluation population of solutions in your opinion, or does it that because of this limitation?
I think there's been a lot of work on randomizing prompts for like different problems, not problem solving. Like for example, like for like captioning and like different tasks. But for problem solving, I haven't. So this is something that I'll say that people are interested in. I haven't personally worked on it. I'm sure it could be useful. I'm not sure that it's like that. Maybe it's the 5% gain, not the 50% gain. So it's one of these things that I'm sure people will work on it, but maybe it wasn't the biggest. Maybe it's not going to give you the biggest marginal gain for your time. I think bigger marginal gain is actually the structure of how many model calls you have. Yeah, but it definitely makes sense. And I think there's a lot of like more formalism and more studies to be done on how diversity affects these things. So that's just a picture of what it looks like. You have these n generations at every step, and then they randomly combined with, I mean, I wouldn't have drawn the picture right this. I would have drawn it like sort of a neural net looking picture where at every level you have n nodes and they sample k from the last thing, but they chose to draw it in this way. So this sort of tests this hypothesis. Is it better to continuously refine your own idea, or to keep iteratively combining your ideas with many more ideas from the population? Is it better to keep looking at new ideas, or just keep looking at your own idea? And so they showed in this paper that actually, you would expect that actually the more ideas that you combine from the prior iteration, the better the model does. So the more intermingling of your society that there is, and the more communication between different solutions, the better the performance. These different bars are corresponding to how big K is, how many samples from the last. So the lowest one is one sample, then two. You can see even just going to two samples gives you a huge boost because it gives some mixing of the chains. And so aggregation is this key driver. How many different solutions do you aggregate at each step? And even improving it after two is still an improvement. Okay. So I have a couple more minutes left here. So I'll just summarize. These are two sort of very simple approaches. You could vibe code each of them. You can find them online. They're very complementary. So the verification and refinement is sort of this very sequential algorithm. It refines over and over again. It has the pros that it can really dive deep into one specific line of reasoning, but has the issue that it might get stuck in sort of a local minimum because it's sort of only doing one solution. On the other hand, you have this sort of genetic algorithm, which is evolving, has many solutions, is like very parallel, and so is able to explore a lot of the space of solutions, but it sort of lacks this more explicit verification. It doesn't have a verifier that's consistently criticizing it. Hey, this is what you did wrong. Hey, this is what you did wrong. So it's incorporating both of these ideas into our inverse time scaling routine is sort of maybe the best way to unlock best of both worlds. And so now I have just a couple of slides. I just want to say a couple things about sort of like some of the future of how inverse time scaling is being explored. One thing I want to talk about is that there's all these it's sort of a different talk entirely, but there's all this way of looking at this as an optimization problem of how do I best allocate my n model calls. We saw two different ways of doing it just there. But there's other axes to optimize this as well. And one example of this is if you're trying to review a 200-page stock paper or a 100-page, ICML paper, is it's not only how should I allocate my model calls in terms of breadth, diversity versus depth, recursion, or sequential. You can also ask, do I need to solve the problem all at once? Can I divide the problem into simpler problems, either manually or automatically by a model, and allocate different amounts of model calls to different parts of the problem? So here's one way. You can imagine many ways that this could come up, but here's one way this would come up. Imagine you have a paper, and your task is verifying and looking at the paper in depth, and finding potential suggestions for improvements, finding potential errors. And you could imagine being like, this is a huge paper. Why don't I split this paper up? I can call a model and okay, how I can split it up? Here's the intro, here's the methodology section, here's the theoretical section, here's the experiments, and so on. And then probably you don't need to have 100 model calls on the introduction. Maybe just one model call will suffice because the introduction maybe is relatively simple. But for the theoretical section, you might want to put a lot of computational resources into doing that. And you can imagine hard coding these sort of values. You could also imagine having a planner model decide these sort of things itself. Look at the paper and decide how to allocate the resources as a function of the difficulty of the section. To go even further there's this very exciting, sort of general technique, which is especially coming from this paper that has been infamous lately, this recursive RLM paper, recursive language models. The idea here is actually very exciting. What they do is it's sort of this completely new paradigm where they allow the model to recursively call itself to solve problems. So they set this model up inside of a Python environment. And instead of giving it the whole prompt that it wants to solve as context, if it did that, then suddenly it needs to fit it in context, and that's difficult. They instead write it to some framework, to disk, and the model gets the right code that allows it to programmatically access the context. So it can say, read this section, it writes code, has full ability to read and manipulate the input, and then it can read things off. And then not only that, it can programmatically and symbolically call itself. So it can like write a for loop where it says, iterates over different sections of the paper and says, do this, then call model to do this. And so it can recursively call itself on different parts of the model. It doesn't need to read the output directly. The output can be written to disk as well. So it circumvents the issue of fitting everything in context, which models have that bottleneck. But it also allows the model to offload some of the work. It's trying to solve a problem. Oh, there's a hard lemma. Can I solve this lemma? Well, let me just offload it to another model. And like it allows the model to find the discrete modular tasks that need to be solved and have those problems solved, and then they come back. And so this has been exceptionally a big improvement. And by the way, there's one slide I realized I wanted to talk about, and I don't know where it went. Here, I must have skipped this slide. I'll end on this slide, but one thing I want to point out is that like this was from this result of reproducing the IMO gold medal. And if you ran the model 32 times on these IMO problems and looked at the best of 32, so see if it solved the problem, each problem, best of 32, it got, better than I would do on the IMO, but still like 30%. So not even bronze medal, I think. Using a very similar amount of model calls, total model calls, but doing this verifier loop, this verifier solver loop, this is a huge boost. They went from like 30% correctness to like 85% correctness. So I haven't even used more compute. I haven't changed the model. I've just structured the model calls differently, and I've unlocked a whole new capacity. So the takeaway that maybe it was a good takeaway to leave you with is that this latent capacity is already in the models. It's not like we've trained a new model. We just had to unlock it somehow by getting the model to think in the right way, just like you might, sort of structure your research program in a way that will allow you to solve the problem in a structured way. It's this sort of structured model calls that's unlocking otherwise inaccessible capabilities of the model. This is like a step change. So yeah, I'll leave on that, and thank you very much.